When it comes to the definition of most valuable characters for Genshin, different things might come to mind. Primarily, people might think this is a sort of a character ranking video, where I just list the best units in the game. However, I wanted to do something a bit different with this one. To me, valuable in the context of Genshin means a character that single-handedly manages to improve your team building possibilities. Oftentimes, MiHoYo will release characters that are specifically tied to one type of composition, and as such, sort of need the presence of one or two key characters to function optimally. Think of Child with Bennett and Xianling, or Neil with Nahida. This can be especially bad for your account if said characters are at the center of other incredible teams as well. Basically, this video will be filled with 5-star characters that don't need a specific composition to do well. Rather, they can function in a lot of different teams and provide you with a lot of options to clear the abyss. I'll go by element. Let's start with Dendro. After all, nobody talked about how good Dendro characters are for the past 10 months. Still, whenever people say that, they reference to Nahida as the reason Dendro is overpowered, but that's not quite correct. In general, whoever has some sort of on-field Dendro application can enable some of the best teams in the game by functioning as a driver for Hyperbloom and Burgeon teams. Baizhu and Al Haitham are not as good as Nahida application-wise, but they compensate with great healing and solid damage output respectively. Aside from that, all of these characters cover different roles, and they basically function in all Dendro teams. Al Haitham is clearly geared more towards the damage aspects of the game, so Quicken and Quickbloom are his bread and butter, but he has enough application that he can even do well as the on-fielder on Nilubloom teams, for example. Baizhu is a weaker Nahida offensively, as he comes without her strong damage profile and AoE, but he can still be used to enable all possible Dendro teams, with an extra dose of comfort since he's so great as a healer. However, clearly if you're thinking of making a Dendro team, your first thought should go towards Nahida. The Dendro Archon comes with incredible AoE application, very solid AoE damage and great supportive capabilities for on-field carries. The main difference between her and the other Dendro characters I talked about is that her application is more flexible by having both guaranteed AoE and flawlessly consistent hit frequency, so the Dendro teams where she's in that can benefit from those aspects are generally a step above offensively compared to other variants. Still, any of these 3 units can pull a lot of work by himself for this niche, and each one of them will considerably improve your account if you didn't have any of them beforehand. For Hydro units, it's a very similar argument. Hydro is the backbone of most of the great elemental reactions in the game, and as such, any Hydro character that can consistently provide an application for their teams is going to be great. Somebody like Child struggles at doing this due to his annoying cooldown mechanics and lack of off-field application potential, but in turn, most other 5-star Hydro units are quite great at it, as they don't have such limitation. Specifically, Ayato, Kokomi and Yelan are all units whose team list is bigger than the list of your university exams, although their roles within the team can vary significantly. As a baseline, having good Hydro application will allow you to enable teams of the caliber of Vaporize, Freeze, a good chunk of the Dendro teams I talked so nicely about before, and Taser teams. The good thing about this type of variety is that you have great free-to-play teams like the Dendro ones and the Taser teams, so teams whose total damage mostly scales through cheap stats like Elemental Mastery and high investment juggernauts like Vaporize and Freeze. Ayato and Kokomi are obviously different compared to somebody like Yelan when it comes down to making these many teams function, since a part of their application is tied to them being on field. While this can generally work for national and overweight variants, where the other characters on the team are off-fielder by nature, this aspect imposes some playstyle variations for teams like Hyperbloom, that like to use Dendro characters as on-fielders to maximize the creation of blooms during their rotation. For these reasons, Ayato and Kokomi variants are generally downgrades to the best possible Hyperbloom teams, but are still good enough to do pretty well in the Abyss regardless. Kokomi generally comes with more benefits than Ayato, as she also covers the healer role, which makes her a greater pick for teams that generally don't have one by default in their lineups, like Freeze and Nilou Bloom comps. Yelan differs from them by mostly having off-field and single-target application, which is why many people call her a Shincho clone. Effectively, she can cover that role and replace Shincho where needed, but she's also so much more than that, as her damage profile is a bit higher and scales much higher with Constellation's investment, and their damage buffs make her a better pick for all the teams that have an on-field carry dealing raw damage. So think of Raiden Hyper, Wanderer Hyper, Xiao Hyper and more. Only that, but the double Hydro lineup where she's placed alongside Shincho has become one of the most common team structures in the game. All of this makes Yelan the most valuable unit out of the bunch here, but both Ayato and Kokomi would be fine additions to your box, as they fit well in so many teams that they will always open up good options for your Abyss runs. Moving on, Raiden is the only Electro 5-star that is worthy enough to end up in this video. As an Archon, Raiden has an incredibly versatile kit that allows her to cover different great roles, just like Nahida. Her main positive is the capability to make her teammates recover energy while she hits opponents with her burst attacks, something that allowed people to make easily manageable National and Eula teams around her. Specifically, Rational is a composition that never really stopped being used since Raiden launched. While it slowed down slightly after Dendro's release, since that came with even easier teams to play with, it's still going pretty strong nowadays. Luckily, Raiden can also fit in those very Dendro teams, and more. In fact, aside from her energy-related supportive capabilities, she also has high damage potential thanks to her really high scalings, which make her scale greatly with buffs, and she even has versatile application by being able to both drive on field and consistently hit with Electro from off-field, which makes her a great fit for several kinds of Dendro teams. We're approaching the end, and it's impossible not to mention Kazuha in a video like this. The lone wolf from Inazuma was surrounded by skepticism at release, as at that time, Animo already towered over the game with characters like Venti and Sucrose carrying its flag. But Kazuha managed to cast all of those doubts aside by being obscenely overpowered. It became clear very quickly that the only thing he was below Venti at was grouping, while he was better at everything else. This made him age much better than the Anemo Archon, since hordes of enemies Venti can't easily group up and bosses are quite common in the Abyss now, and Kazuha just does much better in those scenarios thanks to his consistently invaluable offensive tools. He's often compared to Sucrose since they have a similar archetype, and it's true that in single target scenarios their performance in elemental reaction based teams is similar. Still, Kazuha is ultimately superior, because the way he dominates AoE scenarios through grouping and his own damage is something Sucrose just can't replicate easily, and on top of that is also incredibly good for mono teams, a team archetype that is quite good and it's still getting better through new releases like Line. Last but not least, Zhongli. I bet not everybody expected to see this guy here, as the Geo Archon is a quite polarizing unit nowadays. The reason is that there is no great theme where his addition doesn't constitute a considerable damage loss compared to other options. Still, a lot of these teams still remain strong enough to clear the Abyss even with that drawback, and the compensation is a layer of peerless defense being added to your units. In fact, Zhongli is probably still the best sustained unit in the game, as he can single-handedly add an extra chunk of health to the team through his shields, who are the best in the game still, and deal with stagger efficiently, countering enemies like the Consecrated Beasts, who are pretty annoying for both of those factors. Generally, if you want comfort for your team, there is no better unit than Zhongli to pick, and that should be rewarded with a spot in this list of units. So, that's it. As you might have noticed, every single unit in this list can be at the center of many different team builds, and in general, when it comes to unit value, versatility is a key aspect, since let's be honest, requiring Bennett and Kazuha to function is so 2021. I'm done for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a comment, a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!